Hey, we're back with another episode of Before You Buy, that show where we give you some straight up gameplay and our first impressions on the latest games releasing. And today we're finally talking about Far Cry 5, the game everyone has kind of been hanging their hopes onto as the big change for the series, or at least for some Far Cry fans. I'm a big fan of the series, I'm not gonna lie, but I've been critical of it. Far Cry 3 is one of my favorite games of all time. Far Cry 4 was decent at first, but kind of bored me over time. And Primal was a nice change too, but Far Cry 5 looked like a drastic departure, and I was super pumped for that. And now that I've had my hands on it for almost a week, it's still very much a Far Cry game. If you were expecting a departure or a big shakeup, you might be disappointed because the main loop and the core feel of the gameplay is very much the same. But if you play all of them and still enjoy all of them, you'll find that Far Cry 5 makes a few interesting changes to the formula that just improve the series as a whole. Now, for the next game down the line, the theoretical Far Cry 6, I think they need to do more. But for now, I'm still having a hell of a good time here. The biggest change for me that made a difference was the questing and exploration structure. Some people have gotten sick of climbing towers and filling your map with tons and tons of icons riddled with busy work to do, so it seems like Ubisoft kind of flipped it on its head. Now the game goes for more of a Breath of the Wild, organic exploration system that fills out your map naturally as you discover things. There's also no mini-map anymore. You really just kind of set out and walk around until something happens or you stumble across a clue to a location. Like saving a civilian on the side of the road and then talking to them usually will give you some intel on a nearby outpost that needs to be raided, or maybe a weapons cache that needs blowing up, or somewhere to meet a character. That's how your map slowly starts to get populated with things to do, because you have to actively engage with the world first. You even have to use your binoculars to mark waypoint locations far off sometimes, emphasizing the actual exploration way more. And it makes for a game world that you find yourself spending more time in instead of just zooming in and out on the map and looking for a place to fast travel to. Now, for some people, I've noticed like on Twitter and social media and stuff, that's not a big enough change to make a difference, but it did for me. There are lulls in the game, but with a lot of my Far Cry play, I would just boot the game up and then just start walking until I came upon something. I love that, and for me it feels way more fun than I expected. That makes it feel different, because once you actually start populating the map and are doing certain things, then it becomes more typical Far Cry fare. You're still tasked with taking out outposts, only this time they feel a bit more unique and many have actual story ramifications to them, which is nice. You're still sneaking around through tall grass, stealth killing dudes, blowing stuff up, shooting people, only this time side quests are stronger, and especially the prepper stashes, which are these kind of mini environmental puzzle dungeons you come across and work through to get more loot. The gameplay, the shooting, the running, the jumping is as tight as it has been, and it's still very fun. Coupled with the little things the game gives to you here and there, it just feels pretty rewarding. This time there's also more emphasis on heroes for hire and fangs for hire, both soldiers and animals that you can bring along with you. So these systems have been available in different ways in other Far Cry games, but here they feel more important, and they almost give more of like a Metal Gear Solid 5 vibe, like having Quiet and D-Dog and going in stealthy. You can almost have the same exact lineup here, and it's fun, and encounters are as good as they've ever been in a Far Cry game thanks to these guys. You know, they're dumb AI sometimes, but they can also be very effective killing machines. I will point out that sometimes the game gets a little too chaotic for its own good. I like a challenge, but there are certain areas in the game where enemies are constantly just showing up and causing chaos. Almost like stumbling over each other just to get to your vicinity and start wreaking havoc. You can be in the middle of an abandoned field with no one in sight, and suddenly enemies will just drive up and start shooting at you. It doesn't make a lot of sense, and the game is usually paced well, but there are some times when this happens and you're just trying to get a breather. You know, like maybe you're in a base area and you're trying to talk to an NPC to get a new mission, and then you'll just have the conversation interrupted by a truck rolling up and shooting, and then another truck will pull up, and then a bear wanders in from the woods and starts attacking everyone, and then a helicopter starts shooting at you. Look, I like the sandbox chaos most of the time. It makes for good, hilarious stories. But seriously, it's a weird complaint. I only bring it up because sometimes it feels broken, like the game isn't supposed to be doing that. Not all the time, but it's worth pointing out because occasionally it'll annoy you. Because besides that, the other big improvement is the setting. It's vastly different from previous Far Cry games, and honestly, I kind of love it. Wide open farms and fields and grasslands with cows and tractors, and then you have mountains, forests, lakes, and rivers. It doesn't really come off like an insanely new and fresh Far Cry location until you really start spending time in it, especially if you're actually from the United States. The street signs look like our street signs. The small little town feels like an actual small town in the middle of America, and yet you're running around doing crazy dumb Far Cry stuff in it. I think that's really cool. It's a welcome change, and it does help the game feel a little more fresh. There's also a cool atmosphere and tone thing they do where Far Cry is always mixed with absurdity and wackiness as well as serious stuff, but here the serious stuff is really grim and foreboding and gory. It almost feels like Outlast 2 at times during the daylight. It makes exploring the world that much better for me. The wide open spaces are really great for more time spent up in the air too, which is pretty decent. Airplanes are new to the series and they're fun to fly and shoot stuff with, even if they don't feel very fast. For me, it's still just another excuse to use your wingsuit and parachute to get around like the previous games, and I'm glad that's still there. I really enjoyed the vehicle emphasis this time around too. They still control like Far Cry vehicles, but the faster muscle cars really give the driving action a bit more speed and flavor. Nothing's better than tearing ass, fishtailing, and doing donuts and stuff in the middle of a firefight. It's cool. On the progression side, things manage to feel like less this time around. It's hard to explain. You earn perk points and spend and unlock abilities and attributes in no particular order with not much fanfare. This, coupled with the lame character customization, you can't even give yourself a beard, it's that simple, it makes the character build up just kind of feel a little disappointing. Thankfully, the weapon upgrades and stuff are still there, and I do really like grinding a bunch of money to save up for cool guns, but I just couldn't really get excited about the mute character or their progression at all. And you might notice I didn't bring up the story because there's not much going on, at least not for me. If you were hoping for it to make a political statement, it doesn't. Maybe that was missed potential for a better, stronger story. Either way, I don't really mind much. Still, the star of the show is this family of crazy religious cult leaders who take over this county, and they kind of get more screen time than the previous Far Cry villains, which I did really appreciate. That was always my big knock. One of my biggest issues with Far Cry 4's Pagan Min was that he was cool, but we didn't see him enough. Here, we get way more scenes of seeing the villain do their things up close and personal and really hamming it up. Even if they're not always the most compelling because they're just kind of rambling mumbo jumbo, it's still nice. They're still fun to face off and go up against, and the game gives you more story and character sequences than the previous games. It's designed around taking down each individual section of the map. So if you take your time and really grind through each area, you really get to know all the ins and outs of every section. You also get the same decent co-op experience, but progression doesn't carry over because you're playing in one player's world, and that's kind of a letdown. Thankfully, progress and stuff does carry over and incentivize from arcade mode, which is like the repackaged Far Cry level editor that it's bigger than it's ever been, and running through player-created maps and games even solo is really fun and weird and experimental. It does a good job at adding a little more value to the game because even if you aren't creative enough to make cool maps and stuff, playing other people's stuff is accessible and a really fun distraction. And that's what this game really is. Fun exploration and a dash of repetitive grinding in an exciting world, just like the previous Far Cry games before it. If that is your thing, and it is mine, you'll enjoy it. It's a lot of fun. Just don't expect it to really reinvent the wheel. But that's a before you buy. You probably know how it works by now. I give you some pros, some cons, and some personal opinion thrown in there. And now I definitely want to hear yours down in the comments. Maybe you just jumped in. It's only been a day since release. I want to know how you're feeling on this game. How does it look on your PC? Because from what I've seen, it's actually pretty well optimized for once. Maybe you're playing on Xbox One X like me, or PS4, or PS4 Pro. How do the controls feel? Let's just talk about anything Far Cry 5 down in the comments. I want to hear what you guys are thinking about this game because I did enjoy it. If you have any more questions for me, be sure to hit me up down in the comments or find me on social media, Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at Jake Baldino. But you guys probably know by now, clicking the like button does help us out, and we really do appreciate it. And if you're new, you should subscribe because you're joining an army 4 million strong, and we put out videos every single day. But as always, thanks for watching, and we'll see you guys next time.